Now, I would very much like to welcome our next speaker to the stage for our final session of the day, and it is Sustainability and Space Resources. The first speaker here is Dennis O'Brien from the Space Treaty Project.
Hello there, thank you.
Can I help you with anything?
I don't think so. Let me just make sure that this turns on. There we go, thank you. I'm just going to wave to someone to do the things. Okay, there we go. Oh, is this the clicker? Which one do I push? Next, okay. You're all right there. Hello, everyone. Thank you for staying over this afternoon. Before I start, I'd like to mention that was my good friend Bruce Caldwell and my assistant throughout this journey, who is going to have some brochures that we brought. If you're interested in more information at the end of this talk, he'll be in the back to hand them out at the end of the session for you. I have this thing set up here because I can't talk for 10 minutes at a time. The ticker is getting old. So I'm going to start with a recorded version of this, and then I'll pick up about 2/3 of the way through and give you the more updated information. So let's see how well this works. Okay, go. Well, this may challenge my heart, but that's okay. We have a backup plan. Could you get rid of that? Just lift it up. Thank you. Everyone has been very helpful at this session. This is what the pamphlet looks like when you see that. And here we go. My name's Dennis O'Brien. I'm the founder, excuse me for all this, I'm the founder and president of the Space Treaty Project, a scientific and educational nonprofit located in Northern California. Today I'll be talking about how to protect the interests of the private sector under the Outer Space Treaty and any new international agreement that might be produced by the United Nations new working group on outer space resources, including that group of experts who are meeting right here today. This is a pivotal moment in humanity's departure from our home planet, and we must make the most of it. It worked. Let us begin with this premise. Supporting the private sector in outer space is good public policy. We need its resources, talent, diversity, creativity, and enthusiasm for a sustainable human presence in outer space. This is not to say that the public sector does not have those things, but it is not enough. Government budgets alone cannot provide adequate funding. We must expand the free market economy into outer space for a sustainable human presence. And to do that, we must create and protect enough revenue sources to attract operators, investors, and ultimately settlers. So how do we do that? There are 3 basic strategies. First, we must clarify the ambiguities of the Outer Space Treaty concerning private utilization of outer space resources. We can do that by engaging with the UN Outer Space Resources Working Group. The working group has a 5-year mandate, which includes possible additional international governance instruments to augment the OST. Second, we must accept the responsibilities of the Outer Space Treaty. Article 6 states that national activities must comply with the OST, including activities by non-governmental entities. There are no rights without responsibilities, especially the responsibility of respecting the rights of others. Third, we must act with enlightened self-interest. In this setting, that means considering the historical context of humanity's venture into outer space to play the long game that will benefit each of us and all of us as we leave the home world. Thank you. So what are the ambiguities of the Outer Space Treaty that must be addressed? There are three. First, and most important, we must clarify that resources removed from in place can become private property under national laws. The diplomatic phrasing is that such removal is not inherently appropriation, which is prohibited by Article 2 of the OST. The words "in place" are not found in the OST, although they are found in the Moon Agreement, the treaty that people love to hate, but actually has some very good language. It is worth noting at this point that China recently submitted a position paper on the Space Research Working Group, and they did not object to the concept that resources removed from place become private property. Although they did have some concerns, they promoted principles to prevent depletive exploitation of space resources. We'll talk a bit more about that in the next slide. We must also, very good. We must also clarify what it means to remove small asteroids from in place. It probably means removing them from their natural orbit to a place where they can be used economically, though it must be done safely. Remember what happens when the dinosaurs tried this. Secondly, we must clarify that all stations, installations, and facilities are within the jurisdiction and control of the country that authorized and supervises them. This is implied in Article 12 of the Outer Space Treaty and made explicit in Article 12 of the Moon Agreement. By including such language in any new international agreement or principle, we can make sure that the installations and facilities, like the ones the prior speaker was talking about building, that are used for outer space resource activity, including any improvements, remain within the control of that private national who built them in accordance with their own national laws. The third clarification concerns intellectual property rights. These are not mentioned in either the Outer Space Treaty or the Moon Agreement, though they are specifically supported by Section 1.19 of the Long-Term Sustainability Guidelines that were unanimously adopted by COPUOS in 2019. Any new agreement or principle should include that. And I will let you know that I've been watching that expert meeting all day. This is a big deal. They acknowledge that it is private property, protected intellectual property, but there's got to be some way to share information because that benefits all. So work on that. Next slide. Clearing up those ambiguities is essential, but it is just as essential that the private sector acknowledges their responsibilities under the Outer Space Treaty. There are 6 of them. The first 2, free access and non-appropriation, mean that there can be no exclusion zones. Access to resources must be shared. Biggie, access to resources must be shared. The next 3 all come from Article 9. Due regard, which means avoiding harmful interference with the activities of others, avoiding harmful contamination of the celestial environment, and protecting the interests of other countries, both current interests and future interests. Protecting present and future interests may be the key. If you are willing to support a framework that protects the future interests of emerging countries, you are far more likely to get protection for the current interests of whoever gets there first. You will also satisfy concerns about depletive exploitation of outer space resources. The trick is coming up with the principles that balance both of that. Finally, we must share information about the nature, conduct, location, and results of outer space activity. That's a quote from the Outer Space Treaty. Accepting those responsibilities will help promote the cleaner space resource utilization that is the theme of this conference, and will help ensure that the clarifications needed for financial sustainability from the last slide are adopted by the international community. It's a tit for tat, rights for responsibilities. Such clarifications are part of the framework for the future of humanity in outer space, one that will not only empower the private sector, but will maintain a balance of power. No one country or block of countries will dominate. There are many nonprofit organizations, part of what's called civil society, that are working on such a framework. One of those is the Space Treaty Project, which first proposed a model resource agreement back in 2019. That's what's in that brochure. It has undergone extensive public comment and peer review. The current version is only 10 paragraphs long, and it addresses all the issues raised above. A petition supporting the model agreement has gathered over 1,600 signatures. Both the model agreement and the petition are available at spacetreaty.org and in those pamphlets. The last line of the model agreement says, "Nothing in this agreement shall be interpreted as limiting or diminishing the rights of individuals or settlements under customary international law." This means, among other things, that settlements can eventually become independent sovereign states, which is important for many space enthusiasts and organizations, and perhaps everyone sitting here in this room. Thank you. One of those organizations is Space Renaissance International, where I'm honored to be co-chair of their Space Law Committee. SRI has proposed an 18th Sustainable Development Goal to add to the 17 already adopted by the United Nations. The 18th SDG supports civilian activity in outer space as an essential component of sustainability, both in outer space and on Earth itself. You've probably all heard of that loop the past couple days. SRI is here at the conference with a poster presentation and some handouts. Please visit their exhibit and speak with them. You can also visit their website, spacerenaissance.space, for more information and a link to a supporting petition. And now for the historical perspective. Humanity is facing a historical crisis when just a slight shift can cause massive changes that can last for decades, even centuries. This is where I feel like I'm starting to channel for Harry Seldon of the Foundation, but it's very applicable. There are patterns in history, and what happened 5 centuries ago is starting to happen again, and I'm thoroughly frightened that we're just drifting into it, and we all can help to stop that. Anyway, these changes can last for centuries. The closest parallel occurred 5 centuries ago when the age of exploration became the age of imperialism. Then, as now, countries with advanced technology sought to control the resources of new worlds, creating a legacy of war, suffering, and neglect that is still being felt today. I fear that we are about to repeat that pattern. There are some, even now, learned people in academia who assert that whoever gets to a place first gets to make the rules and can establish exclusive resource zones. Others have declared outright that space is a war-fighting domain. That's scary when I hear these things. Meanwhile, humanity is being pushed to the limit by other issues. Every day, we wake up to news of worsening climate change, increasing social unrest, and rising international conflict. To that has now been added the threat of war in outer space. The people of Earth have begun to lose faith in their governments, in their private institutions, even in humanity itself. They are beginning to despair, wondering if there is anything they can really believe in. They are beginning to lose hope. Fellow participants and distinguished guests, our duty is to restore that hope, to counter the despair of war and violence and neglect, to give the people of our planet a future they can believe in, to help the nations of Earth to build our common future. We should do everything within our collective power to protect peace in outer space, as it may be the best way to promote peace on our home planet Earth. Thank you very much for your time and attention, and good luck to you all.
Thank you so much, Dennis. Thank you so much. Thank you. Are you okay?
I'm okay. I made it 3 minutes longer than I thought I would, with 8 seconds to spare. So I appreciate all the help you folks give me. Thank you.
Well, thank you for being on stage. I know that we need to give your voice a break. Would you like some questions potentially now, or?
If someone has a question, I think I can handle it, sure.
So, are there any questions? Yes, we have one hand over there, and another hand over here, and somebody just stretching over there. Be careful when you stretch,
Okay.
when I look at you.
Okay, my name is Guy Pignolet, and I am a member of Space Renaissance Initiative for the 18th.
Can you stand up so that we can see at least a little bit of you?
Okay.
Thank you.
So a little bit of me, because of a major bit of me, because another bit of me is at this time 15 million kilometers from here on the Enterprise flight. But I am, so I say, a member of the Coalition for the 18th Sustainable Goal. Okay. And we shall be at the IAC in Milan with a big booth where I'm going to promote as a test object what I call the Volodya ring, which is an outer space settlement for inhabitants and workers. Workers for instance, making the first space solar power systems. And we have many of our friends who say it's feasible to have that for the year 2030. When Kennedy in '61 said the Americans would be on the moon within 10 years, he didn't have artificial intelligence or internet or everything. And I've met many of our people in the space community who say, with what we have today, we can have the 1,000 people settlement at the Lagrange point or something by the year 2030. For that, we need something. Why is it Volodya ring? Volodya is by Vladimir Siromyatnikov, who did the Apollo-Soyuz project at the heart of the Cold War. And if today we stop, okay, I won't name all of them, but a few of the stupid wars that we have at this time.
I'm starting to lose you, sir. What was your question?
Okay, and the question will come in half a minute. Okay, and if we have the Apollo-Soyuz spirit now, and all the weapon and industries in the world who have the technology, instead of making war equipment, if they start working on things like the Volodya ring, we can have it. So my question is to everybody in this room, because we are going to make papers, we are going to make a presentation for Milan. If you think this is a good idea, would you help and contribute and say to have can you help for the development of the Volodya ring for the year 2030? Thank you.
I'll note that I have been working with Space Renaissance International. I refer you again to their website. A lot of people, including this questioner, have put together a 50 to 60 page position paper. They're trying to shrink it down to more of an executive summary. But it's all about why it's important to support an independent civilian presence in space, not just a government-funded thing, not just for defense reason, but ultimately these independent settlements in outer space that will be good not just for humanity in space, but to help humanity here on Earth. I believe in that, but I can't go into all the details. So please check out their website. Thanks.
Thank you, Dennis. We have another questioner here.
Thank you. I'll try to keep it brief. Carl Hibbets from the Applied Physics Laboratory, planetary scientist. I thought you gave a really compelling presentation. Thank you. And in the end, you talked about the need for hope and left us on a bit of a kind of a cliffhanger. What are your thoughts on what we should be doing to actually create the hope in society that you say is needed?
Well, when I started this in 2017, I wasn't quite sure. But then a couple of years ago, the United Nations COPOIS Legal Subcommittee, they created this new working group on outer space resources. And part of their mandate was to consider new international governance instruments. Now, it's a diplomatic phrase. It could mean treaties. But today, as I was watching the expert meeting group all day, they're thinking more about principles, but principles that are going to clarify these ambiguities in the Outer Space Treaty. I hate to repeat them. I'm starting to fog up. But generally speaking, I'll point to the one that I emphasized. Sharing access to resources. For the last 7 years, I've watched camps form out there. You might call one the nationalist camp, the other the internationalist camp. And the nationalist camp says, we're just going to go do it with our national laws. And you can't stop us because we declare it's okay under the Outer Space Treaty. And you have all these others, the internationalists, saying, no, it's not at all obvious in there. We have to get it together and decide on these things. And as I said at one point in here, the more you're able to agree on a treaty or even principles that protect the interests of the emerging countries, of humanity in general, then you can get protection for the current interests of whoever gets there first, whoever actually starts building and mining and making practical use of these resources. But if anyone starts to try to do that and make those exclusion zones without some sort of international framework that supports it, that's when we start down the path that happened 500 years ago, starting with Portugal and Spain and then all the other countries that use their advanced technologies to gain positions of advantage and then fight over everything. Every day in the news, I pick up something, and it's going in that direction. So I'm begging all of you. I know a lot of you have to look at the bottom line, and I talked about protecting streams of income, and there's enough out there. You know, once you remove something from in place, it's yours. You can sell it. But don't try to just use your own national laws and push your government to say you can claim these vast expanses. Oh, we get all Shackleton Crater because we were here first, and we need that to make enough money. Don't do that. encourage your countries to enter into agreements with other countries, that if you do have some sort of priority rights, it's in exchange for protecting the future interests under Article 9 of the OST, the future interests of those countries and nations and peoples who are going to get there, and even the settlers, the settlements that are going to come later on. So if you can do that, if you can get what you need, but not try to grab more just in the name of control, that's how we can have peace and outer space and encourage your governments to go down that road. That's what I would recommend.
Thank you so much, Dennis. Now, would you like to stay on stage or for the next talk?
I'd love to hear the next talk.
Fine. Well, we will sit on stage, and I hope our next speaker doesn't mind. I'll sit next to you. Our next speaker is Tommaso Turchetto, and he is going to give a talk which is entitled Sustainable Missions to the Moon, Sustainability Guidelines for Lunar Activities, a State of the Art. And he is from eSpace.
Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Turchetto Tommaso, and briefly, quickly, the content of the presentation. And there we go. So, this will be the roaring 20s of the moon. At least 70 objects will be launched towards the lunar environment, so starting with NASA, but also ESA, and as well as JAXA, the Indian Space Agency, the Chinese one, and Roscosmos. They are all going to the lunar orbits. And in addition to this, many private companies are joining the space race of these years, with missions not only of scientific exploration, but also for resource utilization, manufacturing, construction, and who knows, maybe space tourism. So, to have this scenario, of course, we have to take in consideration the sustainability. We can define the term sustainability in 3 different ways. So a mission is sustainable from a commercial actor if it is sustainable in an economic way. Then a mission manager thinks that a mission is sustainable if it is programmatically repeatable. And the latter, an environmentalist, thinks that a mission is sustainable if it is not harmful for the environment in the long term. And this is also the aim of my work, to assess which could be the space debris risks and the mitigation strategies of a lunar mission, and which could be the consequences of it. Despite we have a few objects in this environment, we have to act now in order to spot the real problems which space actors will need to face, raising their awareness to avoid the nowadays problem around the Earth, one above all, the space debris. So in this slide, we can see a brief sum up of the policies that are entirely or just mention the sustainability of the moon. One of the few legal binding documents that mention a sustainable behavior for the moon is the Outer Space Treaty, and we had a discussion in the last presentation. All the other documents from United Nations or international level, like the Artemis Accords or the COSPAR from Planetary Protection, are not legally binding and voluntary, but they are very important because they started to create a general consensus on sustainability around the moon. As we can see here, there are recent efforts in this direction also by space agencies such as ESA and NASA, but also JAXA. And in this new decade are emerging new industrial associations from members of companies interested all in the lunar economy, like Euro2Moon, that share practices and guidelines for being sustainable in this frame. In particular, the new space debris mitigation requirements from ESA started firstly to talk about the end-of-life management in lunar environment, and my work was also inspired by this document. So before continuing, it's right to define what I intend in this presentation with lunar environment. So all the orbits around the moon, which could be, for example, the low lunar orbits, the lunar frozen orbit, and the distant retrograde orbits, we can see them in this picture below, and all the orbits around the Earth-Moon Lagrangian points. And so, for example, the halo orbits, which are 3-dimensional orbits around the Lagrangian points, but also the near rectilinear halo orbits and the Lyapunov orbits, which are planar. So the biggest problem of this region of space is that it's very unstable for different reasons. So a spacecraft in this environment is affected by the presence of multiple bodies, the solar radiation pressure, and also by the lunar gravity itself. In fact, especially for the orbits near the lunar surface, the regular mass concentration of the moons, called mascons, creates an uneven gravitational field, which drift the orbital parameters of a spacecraft. And so all these considerations lead to the consequence that a spacecraft in lunar environment has to have a huge amount of propellant for station keeping across all the entire mission. Otherwise, it can drift to the deep space or to the lunar surface, or also it can re-enter to the Earth's sphere of influence. And so we said that lunar environment is unstable and that will be populated with several objects in the coming years. That is why we need to start to think about the management of the end of life of this spacecraft also there. ESA, in its latest space debris mitigation requirements, proposed 4 different types of techniques. So the first one is the lunar impact that could be performed both in a controlled or uncontrolled way, which could be one of the cheapest solutions, but it has to deal with planetary protection. Then there's the Earth re-entry, which could be cheap too, but with a very long-term flight and crossing the protected region, so GEO and LEO. And the latest 2 disposal strategies involves the injection in a parking orbit. The heliocentric environment seems promising for its slow dynamic, but it requires assessment to verify the stability and also the detectability of the spacecraft. The latter, the lunar graveyard orbit, can coincide with a distant retrograde orbit, so a very stable set of trajectories, but that still needs information and most of all have a high cost access, especially from the low lunar orbits. And so in this table, we can see which were the planet disposal techniques for all the missions to the moon starting from the 60s. And so we can notice that there is a distinction between lunar impact and lunar landing, with the latter, which is a soft landing on the surface of the moon, and that at the moment there are no missions which planned to use a lunar graveyard orbit for the disposal. The most worrying thing, however, is that 22 objects had no planned disposal, and many of these belongs to very recent missions. And so, looking at how several space actors act in lunar orbits, even on recent missions, it is evident the sustainability for the moon is not a priority at the moment. It seems that there's maybe a lack of coordination and transparency in this frame, which is the one of the first thing to fix in order to provide a sustainable behavior. This may be due to a lack of knowledge, of course, of this environment, and also a lack of precise policies and guidelines entirely dedicated to lunar sustainability. And so this led me to write, thanks to the help of space actors and people involved in the space world, one of the first guidelines entirely dedicated to the sustainability in lunar orbits, which aims to mitigate the space debris issue in this region. This document takes care about the management of the end of life of a space mission in lunar environment, and in particular, it recites that a plan for disposal of the spacecraft and or orbital stages and the management on the end of life should be assessed from the mission requirement analysis and definition phases. Moreover, it requires that every choices and selections should be justified, especially for the disposal options. It is divided in sections and covers the environmental impact of the missions in space, focusing on the limitation of space debris released during operation and created after a lunar impact, the minimization of the potential for on-orbit breakups, and the post-mission disposal based on operative orbit. So, these guidelines, for example, are applicable to existing spacecraft that are already in lunar orbits. So the first one we see here is Danuri, which is a 550-kilogram satellite in a low lunar orbit, which doesn't have a published end-of-life technique. So it could follow, for example, the guideline 5.3.3 of the document, which says that a spacecraft in a low lunar orbit should prefer a lunar impact disposal or a heliocentric injection. For the reason we said before, the planetary protection, the impact location has to be assessed, as well as the propellant on board for the disposal, to see which type of maneuver can be done. In the middle, we can see the Chinese spacecraft Kuei-Kuiao, which is a 300-kilogram satellite in a halo orbit around the second Lagrangian point. And as before, its disposal technique is not published. So it could follow the guideline 5.3.4 of the document, which is the guideline for the spacecraft in a halo orbit around the second Lagrangian point, of course, and that suggests to a spacecraft to preferably dispose with a lunar impact or an heliocentric injection. This choice should be done with a trade-off at a system level, considering, for example, the propellant available, the detection capabilities of the spacecraft, and the impact location in case of a lunar soil disposal. So we can see here the last mission, Capstone, which is a CubeSat from NASA in a near rectilinear halo orbit, which is a subset of the halo orbits. NASA shared information about its end of life, and they say that it will impact on the surface of the moon in a safe zone. So could be compliant, of course, to the guideline 5.3.4. What creates maybe the need of more assessment is the passivation of the spacecraft. NASA said that it won't be passivated to have a navigation aid until the lunar impact. This is also the statement, of course, of this guideline, the 5.2.1, but maybe a further assessment is required in order to understand the real consequences of don't passivate a spacecraft impacting the moon. And of course, this guideline will be applicable for future missions in this habitat too. So, for example, the Lunar Trailblazer of NASA that will run a low lunar orbit can follow the aforementioned guideline that we said before for the Korean spacecraft. So this works, so two main iterations. So the first one, while I was drafting the guidelines, thanks to a state-of-the-art research and the valuable inputs from the eSpace team, the EPFL Space Center. And the latter, more recently, it was a review of the document exploiting the inputs from people across the world of the space sector with different backgrounds and also from different regions of the world. And so in particular, this last revision has been fundamental to give to the guidelines more credibility from a scientific point of view. And of course, the time I spent in this research made me aware that we still need improvements if we want to act sustainable in lunar environment. First of all, we need to continue the research related to the lunar impacts to see if it's feasible to create a sort of lunar landfills in particular zones of the lunar surface, closing this loop, this cycle with the recycling of these materials. Then we need a better space situational awareness in this region, especially because from the Earth we can't see this environment. And so for sure with the missions ad hoc, but also maybe improving the collision avoidance maneuvers capabilities of the spacecraft, and maybe adding some space-based observation hardwares inside the spacecraft that are going there. And then we have to start to think about the sustainable end-of-life management also for lander and rovers, not only for orbiters. And so, to conclude, we said that there's a lot of interest in lunar orbits that is expected to increase in these years, but this environment is unstable. And so we need to reinforce the literature on lunar sustainability to ensure a prosperous future for the moon. And this is why I gave my little contribution to this research, writing this document, the Space Debris Mitigation Guideline for Lunar Orbits. So thank you for your attention, and if you want to reach me out, you can write me a mail or reach me out on LinkedIn if you want to discuss also these guidelines too. Thank you anyway.
Thank you, Tommaso. Thank you. Are there any questions for Tommaso? Yes, we have a question here.
Hi, Lorenzo Bichisao from the European Space Agency. I think a very interesting initiative. I wanted to ask if the guidelines are published and what the next steps are regarding getting them, let's say, more exposed and potentially adopted. Yeah.
Thank you for your question. Well, the guidelines are not published yet, but we are working with the eSpace team to see which is the best way to disseminate this work, because yes, we are taking inputs from the experts, but now I think that in a short time it will be the moment to maybe disseminate it, and also to cooperate maybe with bigger regulation frameworks to spread them.
Any further questions? Yes, I should know your name by now.
I'm Martin.
Martin, I'll remember that now.
Would it be okay to have one question for Dennis? Is that okay? If any other questions too?
No, yeah,
Thomas?
please go.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
So I was wondering, I know the parallel isn't quite exact because in Antarctica we're not mining anything as far as I know, but would the Antarctica Treaty, I think that's the correct name, I'm not entirely sure, be a template for what we need, whereas in Antarctica we are all together and doing science mostly?
People have looked at the Antarctic Treaty, at the Convention on the Law of the Seas, and generally they kind of see them as restrictive. There are levels of international cooperation, but the key now, and it's the word that's everywhere, is resources. The exploitation or utilization of resources. And those particular treaties seem too restrictive in general, although there certainly are parallels. Some people point to the Svalbard Agreement as a better potential parallel because it does allow exploitation, utilization of the resources there. Of course, a lot of those resources can be renewed by the ocean and all. And there are some rules about due regard. Any money that is taxed on any of the activities there has to be used there for improvements there. So there are some parallels for some sort of future framework for the moon and beyond. So Antarctica shows how nations can work together in a limited, almost purely scientific way. But when it comes to the utilization of resources, which has become the hot topic now that it's feasible, I think we have to look a little beyond that for a good parallel.
I've changed mics. Thank you. Thank you, Martin. Any other questions? Oh, yes, it's Jakob. Your voice is strong, but the online people, it's still not strong enough for them.
Thank you very much. So it's Jakub from Polish Academy of Sciences. My question is whether your work, Tommaso, will become, or there is a plan that this will become a part of ECSS standards at some point, because I think it's missing at the moment, or not?
What do you mean? Can you repeat?
I mean, this European cooperation for space standardization standards.
Well, of course, as I said before, there's the idea maybe to spread this work to cooperate with the major regulamentations frameworks. This could be an idea, of course. I know that there are efforts, as I said during the presentation, also from the Space Agency and maybe from other organizations. So we are trying to be involved to this and to see what happens.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much. Thank you. Thank you. Dennis, I know you can stay here and we will get you off stage in just a moment. Maher, quickly back on stage because there's a slide in front of me here. And just before we go to the cocktails and discuss treaties and various other positive things, hopefully, not just what's happening geopolitically, but we have other things to look forward to. Haven't got Maher?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Lisa. And sorry about keeping you a bit later than anticipated, but we have on June 28th, June 29th, our 7th edition of the Astro Day Lecture and Festival. This year it's taking place in the beautiful surroundings of Cercle Cité in the heart of Luxembourg. And we have a fantastic program this year. We have panels of discussions, we have booths, we have exhibitions. We'll be talking about data sonification in space, augmented reality, virtual reality, and artificial intelligence. We have a panel on from DART to HERA, and we will also be this really fantastic opportunity to monitor an asteroid which will be at its closest approach from Earth at 8 million kilometers. We have a control of a telescope in Tuscany, and it will be done at night, so it's a virtual astronomer at night. We have few astronauts and cosmonauts. These are some of them that are coming. There's a panel on, for those who are from Luxembourg, on space education, the Luxembourg vision, because that's something which is really flourishing. Space resources, space-based solar power is another topic. And finally, we have a whole panel for young researchers who will present their work in there. This is funded by the Luxembourg Space Association, FNR, and the Roche Foundation. And we look forward to seeing you all over there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maher. Thank you so much. Well, with that, I now invite you all to enjoy a cocktail and get to know one another even more than you did last night, but be back for 9 a.m. tomorrow. Thank you.